What is up, folks? If you have been in the market for quite literally the brightest RGBW LED tubes that are available, then look no further. These Sensei tubes from Soonwell are the tubes you've been searching for. However, they do come with some fairly substantial drawbacks. But first, let's talk about all the things that I enjoy the most when using these tubes from Soonwell. So what I have here with me today is the 2-foot Sensei tube known as the ST25 and the 4-foot Sensei tube known as the ST50. So that right there probably reveals to you why such the high output, knowing that the 2-footer is pulling 25 watts of power while the 4-footer is pulling 50 watts. So just for comparison, a 4-foot Pavo Tube Mark II 30X from Nanlite maxes out at 30 watts of power, while an Astera Titan is maxing out at 48 watts. So right now I have both of these set to 5%. This one is on a CCT loop, and this one is on an HSI loop. And basically just wanted these to be on throughout so you could see one of the benefits of these tubes, which is the built-in diffusion. Now, in my testing, the Soonwell ST50, aka the 4-footer, is about 3 foot candles brighter than an Astera Titan. In a 3-meter shootout, the Sensei ST50 was coming in at 118 lux, while the Titan tube was coming in at 86 lux. And I did compare these Soonwells to the new Pavo tubes as well with my Sekonic 800 color meter, and we're going to be diving into all of that in a minute. Something else that I really like about these Soonwell tubes is their amazing CCT range. With these guys, you can go as low as 1600 Kelvin all the way up to 20,000 Kelvin. And as you will soon find out, that color is fairly accurate and clean. I absolutely love that broad CCT spectrum because that is actually something quite unique for an LED tube within this price range. So right now, the 4-footers are going for $4.99 a piece, while the 2-footers are $2.99. And they both come in these really nice shoulder soft carrying bags, and they have their own proprietary clamps, which we'll get into in a minute. And if you get the Sensei ST50 4-foot tube, it comes with a couple additional accessories, such as this little baby tripod, which it is standing on right now, as well as this little baby pin adapter for mounting directly to a light stand. The final thing that I love about these Sensei tubes is the build quality. When I hold them in my hands, they really feel like a solid product. And that is primarily because they are IP65 weatherproof with an alloy housing and, like I said earlier, built-in diffusion. So beyond those awesome features, they are also jam-packed with all of the same special effects and HSI controls that literally almost every other RGBW LED tube on the market has nowadays, including XY color mode, a library of Lee gels, and DMX control. Now, before we get into the colorimetry, I want to dive into the computer with you all and show you how I used this 4-foot ST50 Sensei tube on a shoot that we did recently for the LA Lakers with someone named Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Perhaps that legendary name sounds familiar to you. Let's check it out. This was an interview of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, legendary basketball player. They interviewed him at the Lakers training stadium. So this is ENG new style shooting here. I was not the DP on this. I was just hired as the gaffer with my little minivan package. And, you know, I know the cinematographer on this. And because of that, I threw in my Milvis lenses. They shot this on 2 Canon C500 Mark IIs, and then the handheld on Easy Rig camera was a C300 Mark III. Okay, so those are the cameras and the lenses being used. Again, this is not very nuanced lighting, which you would normally see. This is very new style, right? So the wide shot is kind of what dictated or what made the lighting such a struggle on this particular job, because we can, as you can see here on the screen, we have quite a bit of space behind the interviewee and the interviewer, right? There's a lot of room there. Originally, that's where some of my lights were kind of on edge of the frame there, so we had to back them up even further, because any situation like this where it's an interview like this, my first train of thought is to immediately go to back cross key, right? That's immediately what I do, and that's what we did here. Well, as you can see, they are stacked right up against a glass wall. Okay, this was the location that both the cinematographer and the director decided upon but it wasn't ideal for the lighting in terms of the very tight confined space and them being up against this glass wall. So my lights obviously had to be on the other side of the glass, which introduces some light loss. Back here is, you know, just off frame is the Forza 500 with a 4x4 and an acrylic grid, and that's, you know, providing the main key to Kareem. Back over this way is a 300D with a big 4-foot dome and grid on it, and, you know, so we're back cross keying here. And then we went originally with just ultra bounce on the front camera side, but, you know, the client didn't think that was very ideal. They didn't like how down the shadow side was. It was a little too dramatic. So because of that, I introduced the Nanlite Mixed Panel 150, flown up high, kind of down on our guy here. You know, just, you know, more of like creating more of a Rembrandt style for him, depending on the angle you were looking at him. And then over here, just for sake of time, and this was, you know, this was up on the 2nd or 3rd floor of the building we were in, and security in the building, so I did have that Soonwell Sensei ST50 tube with me, so I mounted it horizontally on a light stand and just threw it up, and that served as to help the key light wrap more around on Mr. Jabbar, but also, you know, providing eye light for him throughout the shoot, no matter what camera was looking at him. So this is why it's always a challenge for, you know, small lighting packages when you have multiple cameras. It can be quite challenging, especially with this very weird location with glass wall, very tight on space. What's going on here is the ultra bounce is underneath the Soonwell tube. You know, rather than going negative fill, we did a bounce. And that was mainly just because, again, the client wasn't really digging what the negative fill was doing with our talent there. So here you can see it from the back end, and that is a floppy of ultra bounce on a 4-foot wag flag. The wag flags are very nice for, you know, small intimate settings like this where you don't want big frames and stuff. So there you can see how tight this space really was. What ends up happening because of my little tube, he gets a double eye light. But, you know, that's not something ideal that I would be into. I'm not really a fan of double eye lights like that. I'm not even actually a fan of using tube lights for an eye light, to be honest. I got a really cool new tool that we'll be talking about in the future. But, you know, double eye light, you know, that's a really nitpicky thing. The real reason for using the tube last minute was because we were on the 3rd floor. You know, we were trying to save on time, and I had that 4-foot Sensei tube there, so I thought this will be great. It'll help wrap. It was mainly being to help wrap that key light from the Forza, you know, help wrap it around a little more. So here was a situation of what happened when they took Kareem down onto the court. And that was a situation where I stayed up to pack the gear up, and I sent my best boy Dylan down there with the 4-foot Sensei tube, and I just rotated the Forza 500 around, and with that Fresnel on it, it can really have a nice throw to reach Kareem down there. So I'll show you that on this here. Then I took some footage with the GH5 as well, so you can see them down there. There's Dylan with the tube, you know, and Dylan was originally on the opposite side. So he, you know, his first thought was to go over here where this sound guy is here. And then, you know, I let him know, like, hey, Dylan, stay on the same side as the Forza. You know, you want to keep that, because essentially down there, he's really serving as the fill. Because we kept half of the overheads off. So to help balance that out, that's why I rotated the Forza 500 around, threw it that way, and, you know, and reminded Dylan, let's keep that 4-foot Soonwell tube on the same side as the Forza to try to help wrap it around, you know. And because that Soonwell tube is so powerful and you know, a nice big long 48-inch tube, it worked out quite well, and we can look at the grabs of that. But this is a wonderful example of what is going on with all the tools being used here, right? So obviously, the cameraman is having to balance to the overheads, but they are serving as this nice natural edge light on him. So this is Rob, who was the DP, just doing an excellent job of being on the right side of the line. And he is a very talented cinematographer. He's a documentary shooter, and he's got a huge history in documentary shooting. So he has a real knack for finding, you know, the best angles. And in here, this is an example of, you know, the Forza is pumping that light across the stadium. His eye light is obviously you know, the shape of the Soonwell tube. And that's with Dylan being on the same side as the Forza, keeping all that key light with the Soonwell tube all on the same side. And, you know, it's kind of wrapping around. And the edge, you know, the edge isn't perfectly placed, but because it's just a natural edge, it actually is quite pleasing to look at. So that's just a prime example of what you can do with those tubes. And because Dylan just had it on the little kickstand, little light stand, that's just a little light stand that Matthew's Grip makes. You know, I have a couple of those in the van. And, you know, so it's not a big, crazy baby stand. It's not big. It's not heavy. You know, it's not awkward. It's just a little stand because it's just a little tube, you know, and you can just, you know, you're just able to run around with it. And it's really assisting what the main light is doing here, which was the Forza 500 being thrown across the stadium. Because you could imagine how down this would look. It almost looked like a horror film if the Forza 500 wasn't part of it. Because the issue with using tubes as main key lights is they are pretty sourcey because it's just one little thing of light. Do you know what I mean? So in my opinion, it's not really, unless you want to put a bunch of them together in a quad bank like what I've been known to do. I've done that many times. If you remember on the little short film that I was the cinematographer on, Keys to My Heart. So this is a prime example of where I had 4 of the or what did I have there? That in that particular job, I was using 2 2-foot Pavo tube, the 15Cs, the first generation of Pavo tubes. They were in the quad bank, and then I wrapped them in unbleached muslin and then put a honeycomb grid over that, right? So that's just a prime example where if you are going to use the tubes, you kind of need to build them out to be kind of like a large panel, and you need something like that quad bank to do that, and then wrap it in diffusion, and then to help control it, because we were shooting in a cave, I used that A-Cray grid. That's the only time I would want to use the tubes as a key light, if I was able to stack them next to each other and do that to create a much larger source, because the larger your source is, obviously the softer your light is going to be, the more pleasing it's going to be. All right, so now let's dive in and we can pull out the spec sheets and compare these Sensei tubes to the new Pavo Tube Mark IIs when I used my Sekonic 800. All right, so now we are going to be looking at the specs. This is one of my favorite features of the Sekonic 800 is that you can, it has a built-in memory system, so it makes PDF charts out of all of the readings. All right, so the first one we're going to look at is the CRI charts, right? Now this is when both the tubes, I took readings of both of them set to 5600 Kelvin. So this one on the left side of the screen is the Soonwell, and this one on the right side of the screen is the Pavo tube. Okay, these are the Mark IIs, right? The new ones. Okay, so you'll see the overall CRI, they are pretty damn identical, right? The Soonwell just barely beats the Nanlite. But what I like about this, the chart, is we really get to see which manufacturer is hurting in which channel. So for instance, we notice the Soonwell, his R9 channel is, you know, bringing the overall reading down. Whereas with the Nanlite Pavo tubes, the R11 and R12 channels are the ones that are hurting. And quite significantly, the R11 channel is probably the worst one with that 89.2. But as far as accuracy goes, when the Soonwell is set to 5600, it's actually giving us a 5105, and the Nanlite is actually giving us a 5032. Both not really ideal. However, the Soonwell is winning there because at least it's 100 more degrees closer than the Pavo tube, but neither of them are anywhere near the true 5600, which is actually set on the tube. But here we can see how it's doing on the spectral distribution. The Soonwell is, you know, that green is peaking a little bit higher than the Nanlite, so that's something interesting to take note of. Whereas the Nanlite, its red channel is peaking a little bit higher than the Soonwell. So that is interesting, right? But overall, it seems to be that the Nanlite is a little bit more neutral. Obviously, the blue is going to spike because it is a cold temperature, technically, you know, being, you know, set to 5600, even though the Nanlite's only given us 5032 and the Soonwell's only given us 5105. So obviously you are going to have a blue spike there, but it is interesting to look at, you know, what the reds and greens are doing. So again, you know, that Soonwell is kind of, you know, leaning towards the green side of things. So now we're going to compare the TM30 charts of each tube. These are pretty dang identical as well. Overall, not bad, right? Overall, not bad. This side, you know, again, that's going to lean towards the blue because of the cold color temperature reading. If we look over here on the green side, there we see the Soonwell tube veering out, but the Nanlite is also doing that as well. But they are pretty identical in terms of those TM30 readings. The main thing to look at here is the RF. Okay, the RF is the overall reading, and let me highlight it down here. You'll notice we have RF96 for Soonwell and an RF96 for the Nanlite. The RG is 103, RG 103. So in the terms of that, they're identical, right? The TM30 readings are identical. It's quite hard to get an RF of 100. Okay, so, you know, being 96, these are pretty damn good tubes, both of them, right? So that's just something to keep in mind there. Now we're going to take a look at the white balance chart of each of these. Here is where we see the Soonwell is veering more away from a neutral setting versus the Nanlite. So in this scenario, this is where Nanlite would be the winner because it is the most neutral, whereas the Soonwell, you can see it veering quite towards that red side. And now what I love about the Sekonic 800 is that we can pull up a PDF chart here. And this is just a really nice reference so we can really see output, right? So I put both of the tubes to 100. Now, the Soonwell was the 2-foot version because the Pavo Tube Mark II that I have was the 15X, right? So obviously I wanted to be fair and compare a 2-footer to a 2-footer. Okay, so if we look at the output of these, we can go down here to the illuminance and we can see that, it doesn't matter if you want to look at lux or foot candles. So this was a tight location where I took the reading. It was only a 3 feet distance, so it was a 1 meter reading there. And you can see that, yeah, the Soonwell was giving us 258 lux or 24 foot candles, whereas the Pavo Tube was only giving us 170 lux or 15.8 foot candles. So that is quite a significant difference of output, right? So I think that right there will show you like, wow, yeah, man. And then also in here, we can look at down here on the bottom are the TLCI readings of each of those. And the Soonwell does beat it there in terms of the TLCI. The Soonwell had a 98. Nanlite not too far behind. It was a 97, but still. Other than that, though, the TM30 charts were pretty damn identical. And yeah, even here you can see where, you know, the Soonwell was so far off, not anywhere near a neutral color rendering, to where the Sekonic is showing us what we can do to correct for it, okay? So because it is, you know, leaning on green there, it's telling us, hey man, maybe you want to throw a 1/8 minus green on this tube because we got to bring it back more towards the magenta side. So anytime you look at the CC index, it's telling you, when it's saying 0.3 meter, it's basically telling you, hey man, go -1 on your camera because this light is a little green, and that's why they're suggesting to throw a 1/8 minus green on the tube. So they do tend more towards the green, which that is something that we saw in the spectral distribution chart. Okay, so now let's discuss some of the downsides that could very well be a deal breaker for some of you. The first one is, if you are hoping to use these guys with an app, you will have to purchase the additional control router box, which will run you an extra $89 plus tax and shipping. That to me is a bit of a bummer, especially considering the other competitors within this same price range. Something else that is annoying, it may be a little bit nitpicky, but it is going to mess up your workflow, is that these Sensei tubes are not compatible with all the other tube clamps out there on the market. Me personally, I have lots of options for rigging all sorts of LED tubes. I have this quad bank, I have a couple dual banks, and then I have a gang of single holders. And those work with Asteras, Nanlites, Godox, pretty much all the tubes I've used on set, minus these Soonwells. But the real deal breaker for me personally when talking about these Sensei tubes is the whole issue with power and their battery system. So both of these tubes come with built-in replaceable batteries. So as you can see here, you pop this open and you have a battery that you can pull out. Now this is where it got a little confusing for me because Soonwell did ship me both the 4-footer and the 2-footers. And the 2-footer comes with one cable, while the 4-footer comes with 2 cables. So because of my confusion with the cables, it did take me a little while to realize that when the battery is inside of the tube and the tube is plugged into the wall, you're not actually charging the battery. You have to physically remove the battery from the tube and charge it with this exact same cable. That's just with the 2-footer. Because the 4-footer's wall plug is an entirely different style of cable. So not only do you get this with the 4-footer, but then you also get the same one that came with the 2-footer. Yeah, can you guys start to see how this can be confusing? So in other words, with the 4-footer, this one is wall power, this one is to charge the battery. Meanwhile with the 2-footer, this is the wall power, and also the one that charges the battery. Now, maybe for some of you, this whole swappable battery thing is ideal if you're rigging the tube up somewhere high and it's so high up that you don't have access to wall power and you have to film all day long, so you just want to keep swapping out batteries without ever moving the tube. It seems cool at first, right? But the more I think about it, it reminds me of the days when I was filming all day long with a DSLR that doesn't have a V-mount. You just end up with a big bag full of batteries. I don't know. I mean, I'm pretty sure the whole reason Astera Titans originally came in 8-packs is so you could be charging 4 while the other 4 were being used on set, and then you just simply swap out the tubes throughout the day. I don't know, you know, is it just easier to swap out batteries? Well, it's certainly more cost-effective, I suppose, because you can purchase the individual Soonwell batteries for $79 a piece, plus tax and shipping, of course, but keep in mind, those batteries are proprietary to these Sensei tubes only. However, I am still bothered that you cannot charge the battery while it's inside the tube. And why this is so annoying to me is because when you pull the wall plug on literally any other tube, you would expect the light to just switch over to battery mode and stay on. But the Soonwells don't work that way. In other words, as soon as you pull the wall plug, it kills the tube immediately, regardless if there's a battery inside it or not. So it's kind of a hard workflow to get used to because the majority of the tubes that I use just don't work this way. But also, in my opinion, in order to really take advantage of this new workflow with the whole swapping batteries, that would require at least 2 batteries per tube. So again, you're looking at more additional purchases. Another issue I have with these Sensei tubes is when they are connected to wall power, the only way to turn the tube off is by pulling the plug. In other words, the power button becomes useless when the tube is plugged into the wall. Now, I did find a slight workaround to this. If you go to the Wi-Fi menu, the tube will stop emitting light. However, the tube itself still remains on, and we know this because the OLED screen is still on. I don't know, this is just all a really odd design in my personal opinion. Now, my last little gripe is this tripod system that comes with the 4-footer. To me, it is not exactly the most well designed. First of all, you can see how the tube just, I just can pop it right out of the clamp. You know, so that's not ideal because you would think once it's attached to this that you could just grab the tube by the top and move it around, but you're not gonna have good luck doing that. It's probably gonna do what just happened here. It's gonna pop right out of the clamp. The tripod's gonna fall off on the ground. Sometimes I've seen the tube just pop out of the tripod on its own when it's just sitting there all by itself. This is all just very rickety in my opinion that I think we need to go back to the drawing board on. But with that being said, you know, it is a nice tripod, you know, it's all metal, this feels nice. It's just, again, an odd design in my opinion. See, it fell out just now. It almost flew forward and hit the monitor and the screen, the camera and everything. This is not cool, man. That's all I'm trying to say. That is another reason right there why I definitely do not use the tripod system, especially on a real shoot, because that would be embarrassing as all get out if that thing popped out and fell on the ground. I am not the kind of guy that likes having attention drawn to myself when I'm working on a real job. So the final bummer for me is that these tubes are not pixel mapped. And again, I think that was a huge oversight based upon the other LED tubes out there on the market within this similar price range. So if you can overlook all of those weird little quirks, at the end of the day, I still cannot deny that these tubes are literally the most powerful on the market so far, right? So I have left some links down in the description below so you can check them all out for yourself, do all the research you want. Also, if you're interested in lighting breakdowns and pretty much a virtual job shadowing with me here in LA, kind of like that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar shoot, and you would like to be a part of a private filmmaking community for independent filmmakers, then the Dog Times Patreon is the place to be. Every single week, I release an hour-long video for members only. Exclusive content that the YouTube audience never sees or hears about. All of it involving lighting, cinematography, and filmmaking from a career perspective because I have been working in the film industry full-time for the past 12 years. I want to give a special shout out to all of my Dog Times Patreon supporters, and special thanks to the members of the producers tier, Mike Skinner and Fred Parr. Let me know your guys' thoughts on these Sensei tubes down in the comments, and for now, that is a wrap.
All right.